I still remember the day Jake suggested we film a cooking tutorial together. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, and we were lounging on his couch, scrolling through cooking videos on YouTube when he suddenly sat up, eyes bright with excitement. "We should make one of these," he said, gesturing to a homemade pasta video playing on his laptop. I laughed it off at first, but the more we talked about it, the more the idea took hold. Jake had always been the more adventurous one in our friendship, always pushing me to try new things, to step outside my comfort zone. We've been friends for nearly 2 years after meeting at a mutual friend's dinner party where we bonded over our shared love of food and cooking. Jake was a passionate home cook with a flair for Mediterranean cuisine, while I leaned more toward Asian flavors and techniques. Our cooking styles complemented each other beautifully, much like our personalities. The idea of filming ourselves cooking together seemed both exciting and terrifying. I'd never been comfortable in front of a camera, but Jake had this way of making everything feel possible. "Think about it," he said, his voice warm with enthusiasm. "We're always cooking together anyway. This time we just hit record and share what we love with other people." When he put it that way, how could I say no? Little did I know that this simple cooking tutorial would capture a moment that would change everything between us. Let me explain why this matters. Cooking has always been more than just preparing food for both of us. It's a language of care, of creativity, of sharing something deeply personal. When you cook with someone, there's an intimacy that develops naturally as you move around each other in the kitchen, tasting from the same spoon, reaching across each other for ingredients, creating something together from nothing. Perhaps that's why neither of us had recognized what was slowly simmering between us all this time. In the week leading up to our filming day, we debated endlessly about what recipe to choose. This wasn't just about picking something delicious. It needed to be meaningful, something that represented us both. What about that fusion pasta dish we created last month? Jake suggested one evening as we were texting back and forth. The one with the miso butter sauce and those chili crisp breadcrumbs? It had been a spontaneous creation born from combining our different culinary influences, and it had turned out surprisingly well. The dish seemed perfect, not too complicated to demonstrate, visually appealing, and most importantly, it was uniquely ours. The process of selecting this recipe revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated before. Jake remembered every detail of that night we'd first made it, how I'd accidentally added too much miso, and he'd balanced it with a splash of cream. How we laughed when the breadcrumbs almost burnt because we were too busy arguing about whether cilantro belonged in the garnish. These weren't just cooking memories. They were moments of connection that he'd treasured enough to recall with perfect clarity. Something about that realization made my heart beat a little faster. Planning the filming setup was another adventure entirely. Jake's kitchen was larger, with better natural light, so we decided to film there. The day before our scheduled filming, I arrived early to help set up. We rearranged furniture, tested lighting at different times of day, and debated camera angles with the seriousness of film directors. "The light is best by the window around 2 p.m., Jake noted as we experimented. "And if we set up here, we can both fit in the frame while working at the counter." We spent hours prepping the kitchen, making sure every utensil was within reach, every ingredient measured and ready in little glass bowls like we'd seen professional chefs do on cooking shows. Jake had even bought a new apron for the occasion, a deep blue one that matched his eyes, though I didn't tell him I'd noticed that. I brought my favorite chef's knife, the one my grandmother had given me years ago when I first showed interest in cooking. These small details mattered to us. We wanted the video to feel authentic, to truly represent who we were in the kitchen. The night before filming, I barely slept. I kept running through the recipe in my mind, worried about forgetting steps or saying something awkward on camera. What if I made a fool of myself? What if the dish didn't turn out right? What if viewers could somehow see through the screen and notice the way I sometimes caught myself staring at Jake when he was focused on chopping or stirring? These thoughts chased each other around my mind until morning came, bringing with it a mixture of excitement and nervousness that felt like carbonation in my veins. When I arrived at Jake's apartment the next day, he opened the door with a wide smile that immediately calmed my nerves. He was wearing the new apron already, and his kitchen smelled of freshly brewed coffee. "I thought we might need the caffeine," he said, handing me a mug prepared exactly how I liked it, with a splash of oat milk and a hint of cinnamon. It was these small gestures of thoughtfulness that always caught me off guard with Jake, moments where I realized how closely he paid attention to the details of my preferences and habits. Setting up the camera took longer than expected. Jake had borrowed a decent DSLR from his photographer friend, and we spent nearly an hour adjusting settings, testing the microphone, and making sure both of us were properly framed. "Should we do a test run?" I suggested, still feeling the flutter of nerves in my stomach. Jake nodded, and we recorded a brief introduction, then played it back. I cringed at the sound of my own voice, but Jake nudged my shoulder gently. "You sound great," he assured me. "Natural and enthusiastic. That's exactly what we want." Finally, everything was ready. The ingredients were laid out beautifully on the cutting board. The pasta water was coming to a boil, and the camera was recording. Jake looked at me, gave an encouraging nod, and began our introduction. "Hey everyone, welcome to our kitchen. I'm Jake, and this is my best friend and partner in culinary crime." He gestured toward me with a warm smile. "Today we're going to show you how to make our signature miso butter pasta with chili crisp breadcrumbs, a dish we created together that perfectly blends our favorite flavors." As we moved into the cooking demonstration, something magical happened. My nervousness melted away, replaced by the familiar comfort of cooking alongside Jake. We fell into our natural rhythm. I took the lead on preparing the miso butter sauce while Jake handled the pasta and breadcrumbs. We moved around each other with an unconscious grace, anticipating each other's needs, passing utensils before they were asked for, tasting and adjusting seasonings together. The camera captured our easy banter, the way we gently teased each other, the shared glances of approval when something turned out just right. The secret to this sauce, I explained to our imaginary audience, is to brown the butter just enough to get that nutty flavor, but not so much that it burns. Jake leaned over my shoulder to look at the pan, his chest briefly pressing against my back. "That's perfect," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. The warmth of his breath sent an unexpected shiver down my spine, and I momentarily lost my train of thought. Thankfully, the camera didn't capture my flushed cheeks as I turned my attention back to the sauce. As Jake demonstrated how to make the chili crisp breadcrumbs, I watched him with a new awareness. The confident way his hands moved as he minced garlic, the focused expression on his face as he monitored the breadcrumbs toasting in the pan, the way he unconsciously bit his lower lip when concentrating. These were all things I'd seen hundreds of times before, but somehow today they seemed more significant, more captivating. When he looked up and caught me watching him, his smile held a question I wasn't ready to answer. The filming wasn't without its mishaps. At one point, Jake accidentally knocked over a bowl of grated Parmesan, sending cheese flying across the counter. Instead of getting frustrated, we both burst into laughter. "And that, folks, is what we call adding cheese with enthusiasm," Jake quipped to the camera, which only made us laugh harder. Later, I struggled to open a particularly stubborn jar of chili crisp, and Jake gently took it from my hands, his fingers brushing against mine in a touch that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. These unscripted moments brought an authenticity to our video that we couldn't have planned. We weren't just demonstrating a recipe, we were sharing our genuine connection, the joy we found in creating food together. As we neared the end of the cooking process, the kitchen filled with the mouth-watering aroma of our creation, the nutty brown butter, the savory umami of miso, the spicy fragrance of the chili crisp, all mingling with the comforting smell of perfectly cooked pasta. Finally, it was time for the moment of truth, tasting the finished dish on camera. We plated the pasta carefully, making sure to get the perfect twirl of noodles coated in the glossy miso butter sauce, topped with the ruby-red chili crisp breadcrumbs and a sprinkle of green scallions. Jake grabbed 2 forks, handing one to me with a theatrical flourish. "Ready for the grand finale?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. I nodded, suddenly aware of how close we were standing, how the kitchen seemed to have shrunk around us. "On 3, Jake suggested, loading his fork with pasta. 1, 2, 3. We took our first bite simultaneously, and the explosion of flavors was just as magnificent as I remembered. The rich, nutty butter, the complex saltiness of the miso, the spicy crunch of the breadcrumbs, all wrapped around perfectly al dente pasta. I closed my eyes involuntarily, savoring the taste. When I opened them, Jake was watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, something tender and intense that made my heart skip a beat. "It's amazing," I said softly, aware that the camera was still recording but somehow forgetting to project for our audience. Jake nodded, but he wasn't looking at the pasta anymore. "Yes," he agreed, his voice equally quiet. "Amazing." There was a charged moment of silence between us, filled with unspoken words and realizations. Then, without warning, Jake reached out and gently wiped a tiny spot of sauce from the corner of my mouth with his thumb. The simple touch felt electric. What happened next wasn't planned in our script. In fact, we hadn't even acknowledged that there was a possibility for this moment. Jake's hand lingered on my cheek, and I found myself leaning into his touch. Our eyes met, asking and answering questions without words. Then, slowly, Giving me every chance to pull away, Jake leaned forward and kissed me. It was gentle and hesitant at first, a question more than a declaration. But when I kissed him back, it transformed into something sure and certain, as if we'd both finally recognized what had been there all along. We completely forgot about the camera, about the pasta getting cold, about the tutorial we were supposed to be filming. For that moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us in that sunlit kitchen, surrounded by the aromas of the meal we'd created together. When we finally broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against mine, a smile playing on his lips. "I've been wanting to do that for so long," he confessed quietly. "Every time we cook together, every time I see you taste something with that look of pure joy on your face, I fall a little more in love with you." His words washed over me like warm honey, sweet and comforting. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked, my hands still resting on his shoulders. Jake laughed softly. "I was afraid of ruining what we had. Our friendship means everything to me." I understood completely. I'd been harboring the same fears, telling myself that what we shared as friends was too precious to risk. How ironic that it took a cooking tutorial, of all things, to finally bring our feelings to the surface. It wasn't until several minutes later that I remembered the camera was still recording. "Oh my God," I gasped, pointing to the blinking red light. "We've been filming this whole time." Jake's eyes widened momentarily, then he burst into laughter. "Well, that's definitely not making it into the tutorial," he said, wrapping an arm around my waist. "Or maybe it should. How to make miso butter pasta and fall in love with your best friend could be a hit." After turning off the camera, we sat at Jake's kitchen island and actually ate our pasta, stealing glances at each other between bites, occasionally breaking into giddy laughter at how the day had unfolded. The pasta was getting cold, but neither of us cared. It still tasted perfect, maybe even better now that everything between us had changed. "So what happens now?" I asked eventually, the practical question cutting through our bubble of happiness. Jake reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "Now we figure it out together," he said simply. "Just like we do with our recipes. We experiment, we adjust, we find the perfect balance." His analogy was so perfectly us that I couldn't help but smile. "And the video?" I asked, nodding toward the camera. Jake considered for a moment. "That's up to you. We could delete it, keep it just for ourselves, or edit out the kiss and post the tutorial as planned." In the end, we decided to keep the footage private, a time capsule of the moment everything changed for us. We filmed a new tutorial the following weekend, this time openly as a couple. Our viewers commented on our obvious chemistry, never knowing that they were seeing the aftermath of a transformation that had been captured on camera just days before. Some even said they could tell we were in love by the way we moved together in the kitchen, by the glances we shared, by the easy synchronicity of our cooking dance. Looking back now, I realized that our relationship had been simmering slowly all along, building flavor and depth with every shared meal, every late-night conversation, every grocery shopping trip and farmer's market adventure. Like any good slow-cooked dish, it needed time to develop, for all the elements to meld together perfectly. The camera didn't create our connection. It simply captured the moment when we finally acknowledged what had been cooking between us all along. Food has always been about more than sustenance for both of us. It's about care, creativity, and connection. When you share a meal with someone, you're sharing a piece of yourself. When you cook with someone, you're creating something new together. Jake and I had been creating something beautiful long before we ever picked up that camera, and we continue to do so every day, both in and out of the kitchen. Our first taste wasn't of the miso butter pasta. It was of the realization that what we had was rare and worth savoring, worth acknowledging, worth pursuing. So if you're watching someone across a kitchen counter, if you're sharing taste from the same spoon, if you're creating recipes together that blend your different styles and preferences into something uniquely beautiful, pay attention. There might be more simmering there than just dinner. Sometimes the most important ingredients in a recipe are the ones you don't list on the card: the laughter, the shared glances, the brush of hands reaching for the same utensil. And sometimes, the most meaningful moments happen when the camera catches what you've been too afraid to see for yourself. Total_char_count, 18,723.